Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new Haslem episode. Today we are in Essex, more precisely in the small market town of Maldon, the historic maritime and market town located right on the shore of the river Blackwater. This is actually a new series on this channel, which I hope you'll enjoy it. So in this video and in the next ones that will follow on this topic, starting from now, we will explore famous battles that reshaped borders, the life of those involved in them, and the history as we know it. And after watching so many videos on this channel, I hope you understand when I say that I couldn't choose a better starting point for this series than the monumental Battle of Maldon. The famous British writer J.R.R. Tolkien also wrote about the series of events. He wrote a book about the series of events that took place on that day, and he also wrote an essay inspired by the only poem called The Battle of Maldon, written by an unknown author, which tells us almost everything we need to know about what happened in the Battle of Maldon. So, without further ado, let's do this. Towards the end of the Roman domination in Britain, the Anglo-Saxons started to launch a series of attacks which made the Roman Britain province to collapse. Somewhere between AD 410 and AD 435, the Romans lost control of their capital, Londinium, and their adventure in Britain ended abruptly. Now you probably wonder what's with this statue and who is this warrior, very tall warrior by the looks of it. And first I want to tell you more about the Anglo-Saxons and their adventure here in Britain. But this right here is the hero of Maldon. I came here to show you the statue because we are going down the river on the other side, and it's quite far where I want to go from this place. However, I just wanted to show you the statue, and I'll tell you more about this mighty warrior that you see right here. What followed was a period that spanned across 6 centuries. in which the newly arrived Germanic tribes, Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes, settled in Britain and basically dictated every aspect of life on this land. The historians are calling this period the Dark Ages. Well, not because it was very dark, but mainly because we have very little documentation, written documentation, let's call them manuscripts if you want, in this context, that describe what happened in that period. But another reason why the period between the Romans and the Anglo-Saxons is called the Dark Ages, possibly because there was very little advancement in terms of science and literature, or culture if you want. So this is basically the period called the Dark Ages until the Anglo-Saxons fully settled. But overall, in the 5th and 6th century in Britain, there's been a series of battles, quite violent if you want, between the British Celtic tribes, or those British Celtic tribes that survived the Roman invasion. Believe it or not, they were still here. Basically, they merged with the Romans, majority of them, when they arrived, or vice versa. The Romans managed to integrate the majority of them into their kingdom. However, after the Roman departure, the British Celtic tribes started to fight with the Anglo-Saxons, and I guess you know what happened next. The Anglo-Saxons started to be the main force on this land. In case you wonder, I'm on my way to the place where this battle was held. Just for the reference, the statue that we've seen is somewhere on that side. I'm not sure if you see it because of the sun. It's right there, somewhere there. What I see now, I believe, by the looks of it, the tide is low. It's a lot of mud. I can basically see a lot of mud in between these small islands. I'm not sure how to call these dots of land, these very small pieces, but I will show you what I mean when we get there. But again, it's a lot of mud everywhere. And this is basically a trail. This is a trail. Usually, you know, in the morning people are taking their dogs or are they running and so on. So this is the way to the famous place. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you. Now, right in front of us, on the other side, I believe that is the island. I will explain in a bit what I mean by that. But just for you to get an idea what I'm talking about, let's see if I can get down on these stairs here, hopefully, to be able to show you more. No, it's closed. However, probably now you can see it's a lot of mud here because the tide is low. And if the tide is low, it means that we are lucky. Now, before getting there, let me tell you about some of the most prolific Anglo-Saxon kings pre-927. King Offa is one of them. If you are into history, most probably you've already heard about him. He was an Anglo-Saxon king, probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, and he is known for being the king of the kingdom of Mercia, a very powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdom. And he is famous because he decided to build a so-called earthwork somewhere between the borders of Wales and England. It's a huge, miles long earthwork that basically separated Wales and England. And he did this because obviously they were fighting with the Welsh. He fought in many battles against the Welsh, but also he's known for some battles between him, of course, the kingdom of Mercia, and other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Because as you can imagine, although they were Anglo-Saxons, this doesn't mean that they were on the same path, let's say. So yeah, many battles at that time, surprisingly for me at least, between Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. King Alfred the Great is another powerful king, Anglo-Saxon king. He lived in the 9th century, and he was the king of the kingdom of Wessex, or the West Saxons. He is best known for his battles against the Vikings, but also for making territorial gains during his reign. Like, for example, in 886, he basically fought against the Vikings when these ones were having control of London. And of course, King Alfred the Great won. So basically he managed to help London escape from the Viking domination. And some say during his reign, or actually some say it's coming from him, or it came from him, this idea of unification. However, unfortunately he was not able to do this, but those who came after him, like some of them being even his descendants, eventually, shortly after his death, I would say, or not too long after, managed to unify all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms into one that we now call England, of course, but back then it was called the Kingdom of England. The summer of 927 is probably the most representative period for this country, for England. The Anglo-Saxon King Aethelstan, who was the grandson of King Alfred the Great, managed to defeat Vikings up in the north and managed basically to liberate the last kingdom from England, or Anglo-Saxon kingdom if you want, that was under Viking occupation. That's why on 12th of July 927 all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were brought together, were unified into what we now call England. And although now we can talk about a more powerful alliance, all the Anglo-Saxons coming together, the Viking raids did not stop. In fact, they continued to intensify. And in the 9th century, end of the 9th century and beginning of the 10th century, these Viking raids became even more powerful. And slowly, they managed to regain control, sometimes even for a while, of some parts of England. So Vikings continued to attack England no matter or regardless their unification. So I am so happy to tell you that we are actually here, very close to where this battle was held, the Battle of Maldon. And again, the tide is very low. We are so lucky because basically you can see the crossway where or from where you can access this island. Fast forward to the year 991, Essex, or the Kingdom of East Saxons, was part of England, of course, and the supreme leader was King Ethelred, or otherwise known as Ethelred the Unready. Famous for his huge mistakes during his reign, but the local ruler here, or Earl Dorman, or Earl if you want, was none other than Beardnot. Remember the statue we've seen just a couple minutes ago? That is a statue of Beardnot. And right now, after we'll be able to get on the other side of this island, I will tell you more about him and the famous Battle of Maldon. As I told you already, it's very muddy, very muddy, and because I don't know when the time will go back, actually the tide, I want to make sure that I will be able to come back actually, right? we need to make sure that we will not camp on this island. So much mud. I have to be careful where I step because I feel like it's a bit slippery. And also it's windy. I hope you can hear me well. But this island where we are going now is representative for our story. So hopefully we'll be able to get there safe and sound. So this right here is Northey Island, and in case you didn't realize already, the Battle of Maldon took place between the Vikings and the English people of Maldon. Obviously they had Anglo-Saxons origins, but now in 991 we are talking also about the period after the unification. So of course we can talk about now a battle between the Vikings and the English. The tide is low, I've checked again, and apparently I believe in 1 hour from now on it will be the lowest tide. So I feel like we have enough time to explore this island or parts of it and then come back safely on the same crossway, because as you can see we are here quite this part where I'm standing now, it's higher than that one right there. That's the crossway that I believe if the water goes up by maybe 2 feet, 3 feet, I think we are done. So hopefully we'll be able to get back, but again, by the looks of it, we should be fine. We should have enough time to explore. You can see how the mud looks here, or the soil, should I say. It strikes me how water can go through this soil and form this, I don't know how to call it, this mosaic, let's say, that looks very, very interesting actually. As you can see, it's written here, the causeway can be covered by the tide for 3 hours either side. and of course it's very dangerous to attempt to cross. This is why we need to be very careful, because at first sight it's just, you know, a water and a crossway, but with this mud and with these currents can be really dangerous. But overall, this is how the island looks like. Now, as much as I would like to tell you more about Birtnoth, not much is known about him until this battle, other than the fact that he was around 60, maybe 65, some sources say 68 at the time of the battle. He had white hair, very white, and he was still fit. Apparently he was in a very good shape, and that he was very, very tall. Some sources say over 6 feet, others say 6'5", 6'7", 6'8", so almost as tall as me, 7'1". Now, I wouldn't want to go further because I'm not sure exactly where this road takes us, but the reason why I decided to come here is to help you make an idea how this island looks, because of course, again, it's representative for our story. And I think now actually I'm going back, because right on the right side, basically the way we stepped onto the island, is, in my opinion, the side that interests us. As you can see, there's a gate there, so I'm not able to go onto that field, but I will be able to tell you more once we get there. Now, one thing is certain. The town of Maldon, which is in that direction in the distance, back then would have been much smaller. But Northy Island, this island, was definitely in the same place, and most probably this place, this whole island, as muddy as it is now, would have been back then as well. In the summer of 991, the Vikings made Northy Island their camp spot. They were led by Olaf Tryggvason, the king of Norway at that time. And after they ravaged other coastal English towns, the fleet of 93 ships made their way towards Essex coast, and they landed on this island called Northy Island. The local rural Birtnoth saw them and gathered 3,000 men, mainly locals from Maldon. And while it's hard to estimate because none of us was there, it is said that the Vikings were about 4,000. And again, although Birtnoth was around 60 years old, or a bit over 60 years old, it is said that he was still fit and in a good shape. So, as you can imagine, he was basically a towering presence. So, on the other side of the river, it was Birtnoth with 3,000 English men, and on this side, it was Olaf Tryggvason with 4,000 Vikings. Between them, the river Blackwater. And the only way the Vikings could cross on the other side was using this crossway or small land bridge accessible on low tide. But of course, if you can imagine, if they shouted, they could hear each other. It is said that initially the Vikings asked for tribute, which is something that was happening plenty of times during those years. So, as you can imagine, 4,000 Vikings were standing on this side, looking in the eyes of those 3,000 Englishmen, led by none other than Beardnot. Now, of course, Beardnot refused. He did not accept to pay tribute. Mainly, I believe, especially also because their positioning was a very favorable one. As you can imagine, high tide, the Vikings couldn't go on the main island, is what I want to say. So basically they were stuck on Northey Island. However, as time goes by, the tide starts to lower down. So let's imagine the tide was as low as it is now, which, as you can see, it's pretty accessible. This crossway, this path right here, which ends on the main island, is very accessible. You only need to walk for like a couple of minutes and then you're there. Of course, it's not that wide, so not a lot of Vikings could go through at once. However, it's still something, right? So once the tide started to lower down, the Viking started to advance. So the Vikings were advancing on this crossway, and apparently Beardnot and his men, his 3,000 Englishmen, were right on that side where this crossway ends. Again, a very favorable position. So some Vikings were advancing on this crossway, and Beardnot sent some men towards them. And again, we can only assume that the battle happened somewhere here in this area, if not there, but I doubt that the Englishmen would advance that much. I believe the Vikings came up until this point, let's assume, and then they were met by the 3,000 Englishmen led by Beardnot. So here some Englishmen and some Vikings fought initially right on this crossway, and apparently the Vikings could not go through. Basically, they were about to be defeated right on this crossway. And at that point, Olaf asked them to come back to avoid further losses. Now, if you're wondering why didn't the Vikings spread, considering there's barely any water here at this point, which is a very low tide, well, as you can see, there's a lot of mud, and even on this crossway, it kind of goes into your shoes if you just jump on it and run. So I believe if this is so muddy, this crossway, which is, I believe, maybe 3 or 4 hours or maybe 5 hours without water per day, then imagine how much mud has to be on both sides. So I believe, because I asked myself this question before coming here, if the Vikings were ready to attack, and obviously they outnumbered the Englishmen, I was wondering at low tide why the Vikings couldn't go left and right. And by the looks of it, I can tell you almost certain that, because I'm here and I can see, imagine a Viking full of armor trying to fight some Englishmen after they jumped into this mud, and I don't think it would have been in their advantage. So Olaf decided to ask his men to come back. For a while, the situation calmed down. However, the Vikings were still there. At which point, Olaf asked Birnot to allow him and his men on the mainland in order to have a proper fight. The Englishmen versus the Vikings. What followed is absolutely shocking for the majority of us nowadays. However, before I go into the details, let me shed a bit of light when it comes about some practices of medieval warfare. When we think about battles that took place hundreds of years, 1,000 of years, or even more on this land, majority of us have in mind scenes or depictions from different movies. I mean, how else, right? However, while some movies show plenty of details, some quite accurate, about the battles that took place in Britain and in the medieval England, probably very few of them, if any, mention this very important detail. Medieval battles were often planned in advance, so the time and the day was often planned in advance. So it wasn't unusual back then to hear two kings and their armies that they agreed when and where to fight a certain battle. Believe it or not, in the old medieval English, deciding with your enemy when and where to fight a battle was a matter of chivalry. see what I was telling you. The way this rock formation is formed. Actually, it's not even a rock, it's like mud stuck together. Most probably, if you step on it, it goes down. So the whole place, this whole area that usually is filled with water, had the same consistency. So, as you can imagine, there was no way for the Vikings to access the mainland using the sides, both sides of the crossway. In fact, when I was there, I was feeling like basically I'm going down in the mud. So imagine how it is further from the shore. Now let's go back to our story. When Olaf asked, or should I say shouted, to Birtnoth, who was on the mainland, to let him and his men cross this small land bridge in order to have a proper fight, to my surprise, Birtnoth accepted. So the Vikings used this small land bridge and they crossed it and marched towards the mainland. I know, shocking, but apparently these were the unwritten rules back then. Although part of me wants to believe that Birtnoth underestimated the Vikings, because when you have on the other side, on that island, when you have 4,000 Vikings, more or less, ready to fight until their last breath, the last thing you want is to let them on the mainland. Once the Vikings were here on the mainland, face to face with the Englishmen, they fought fiercely. It is said that up to a certain point the battle was even. The Englishmen were here to protect their land, their families, but some of them were here to fight up until their last breath for their ruler. They were very loyal. Plenty of them were very loyal to Birtnoth. But the decisive moment came when Birtnoth was fatally wounded and died right here on the battle. According to the poem, an Englishman called Godric, who was very loyal to Birtnoth during his life, fled the battle using his horse. So basically he ran away. And some Englishmen that didn't realize that Birtnoth died thought that he fled the battle on his horse. And this whole confusion, not knowing if their leader was still here fighting with them against the Vikings, or even more than that, not knowing that their leader already died, led to one of the most famous defeats in the English history. On the other side, Olaf suffered so many losses that he abandoned his initial plan of attacking other coastal English towns in the next following weeks, because he barely had enough people to guide his ships. Although it's fair to say that I believe after 2 or 3 years he came back. The next day, the locals of Maldon and its surroundings came here to retrieve the bodies of their loved ones, as well as the body of Birtnoth. And what they've discovered was that the Vikings cut his head and took it with them. This whole field, the whole scene, must have been horrific. While I'm staying here and I walk around this place, I can't stop thinking about the courage of the men of Maldon, who decided on that fatidic day of 10th of August 991 to step up and to defend their land. As a consequence, the Englishmen had to pay tribute to the Vikings, famously known as Dangeld or Danegeld. I hope I'm pronouncing it well. I believe after this battle they've paid more than 3 tons of silver coins, which for that time was a huge amount of money. And knowing what happened here in 991, and after doing all this research and going into so many details, this place seems a bit eerie, at least to me, knowing the story of this place, knowing what happened here on that day in the Battle of Maldon. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the story of the Battle of Maldon. A battle between the Englishmen and the Vikings that left huge scars on the Kingdom of England. I wanted to come here to this place to tell you this story, one that showed us or reminded us once again the courage and the bravery of the people of this land. And once again, now I believe you have an idea what might have been the reason why Birtnoth made that huge mistake. The truth is, none of us were in his shoes on that day of 10th of August 991. So I believe it's fair to say that we can only speculate. However, considering that even today, after more than 1000 years after that battle, people still think about it and talk about it, to me, one thing is certain. The Battle of Maldon will never be forgotten